King Solomon was the third king of Israel and is one of the most famous figures in the Bible. He was the son of King David, known for his great wisdom and wealth. Solomon ruled over Israel during a time of peace and prosperity. He built the magnificent temple in Jerusalem, which became the center of worship for the Israelites. Solomon was also known for his wise decisions, like the famous story of the two women who came to him with a baby. And Solomon wisely determined who the real mother was. However, as Solomon grew older, his life began to change. Despite his early success, his later years were marked by a decline in faith and poor choices. Solomon married many foreign women, some of whom worshipped idols. These women led Solomon to worship false gods, turning away from the true God of Israel. This spiritual decline was one of the most significant moments of his life. In this video, we will explore the last days of King Solomon's life. We will look at how his reign started with great promise, but ended in disappointment. We will discuss the impact of his actions, especially how his decisions affected the future of Israel. We will also talk about how his spiritual decline influenced his legacy and the kingdom he left behind. The video will cover the themes of Solomon's later years, his choices that led to his downfall, the prophecy of judgment against him, and the transition of power to his son, Rehoboam. We will also reflect on the lessons we can learn from Solomon's life, both the wisdom and the mistakes he made. Solomon's early reign was a time of great success and prosperity for Israel. After taking the throne, Solomon quickly became known for his incredible wisdom. One of the most famous stories is when two women came to him with a baby, each claiming to be the mother. Solomon wisely suggested cutting the baby in half, but the real mother immediately offered to give up her claim to save the child. This story showed the world how wise Solomon was. Solomon's wealth also grew during his reign. Israel became a rich and powerful nation under his leadership. Solomon made strong alliances with neighboring countries, and trade flourished. His court was filled with treasures, and he built magnificent buildings, including his own palace. One of Solomon's greatest achievements was the building of the temple in Jerusalem. The temple became the center of worship for the Israelites and was considered one of the wonders of the ancient world. It was a symbol of Israel's connection to God and a sign of Solomon's success and faith. During this time, Israel reached the peak of its power, influence, and wealth. Solomon's reign was seen as the golden age of Israel, a period of peace and prosperity. In his later years, Solomon began to make some serious mistakes that led to his downfall. Although he had been very wise and faithful to God in his early reign, things started to change as he grew older. One of the main reasons for Solomon's struggles was his many marriages. Solomon had married many foreign women, some of whom were from nations that worshipped false gods. These women had a big influence on him, and over time, they turned his heart away from the one true God. In 1 Kings 11:1-8, it tells us how Solomon's foreign wives led him to build altars and temples to their gods. Solomon even started to worship these idols himself. This was a huge mistake because Israel's God had commanded the people to worship him alone. By turning to idolatry, Solomon broke God's commandments and hurt the nation's faith. As Solomon allowed idolatry to spread, God became angry with him. In response, God sent a prophet to warn Solomon about the consequences of his actions. God told Solomon that because he had turned away from him, the kingdom would be torn apart after his death. Although God promised not to take the kingdom from Solomon's rule while he was alive, the future of Israel would suffer because of his choices. Solomon's spiritual decline led to trouble for him and his people. His wisdom was no longer enough to keep him on the right path, and his actions caused Israel to fall into sin. This period marked the beginning of the end of Solomon's reign. In the beginning of Solomon's reign, he had a close and strong relationship with God. Solomon prayed for wisdom, and God granted him great understanding and insight. During his early years, Solomon followed God's commands and built the beautiful temple in Jerusalem as a place to honor and worship God. Israel was blessed because of Solomon's faithfulness, and the nation prospered. However, as Solomon grew older, his relationship with God began to weaken. Solomon's many marriages to foreign women led him away from God. These wives encouraged him to worship false gods, which caused Solomon to drift away from the God he had once faithfully followed. His choices to turn to idolatry marked a big change in his spiritual life. Instead of remaining devoted to God, Solomon allowed sin and idol worship to enter Israel. This shift in Solomon's faith had serious consequences for Israel. Because Solomon turned away from God, God warned that the kingdom would be divided after his death. Israel's future would be impacted by Solomon's disobedience. The nation, which had been united and blessed, would soon experience division and struggles, all because Solomon's relationship with God had been broken by his choices. In 1 Kings 11:9-13, God responds to Solomon's unfaithfulness by giving him a prophecy of judgment. God had been patient with Solomon, but because Solomon chose to worship false gods and disobey his commands, God became angry. As a result, God told Solomon that he would tear the kingdom of Israel away from Solomon's family. This meant that after Solomon's death, the kingdom would no longer stay united under his descendants. However, God made a promise to Solomon. He said that he would not take the kingdom from Solomon while Solomon was still alive, for the sake of David, Solomon's father. David had been a man after God's own heart, and God honored his promise to David. God also said that Solomon's son would still rule over part of Israel, but the kingdom would be divided. This prophecy was a serious warning to Solomon. His actions had consequences, and the unity and strength of Israel would be shattered after his reign. Solomon's unfaithfulness to God set in motion events that would lead to the kingdom being divided into two parts, and Israel would face many struggles in the years to come. In Solomon's final days, he was no longer the strong and wise king he had once been. His physical health started to decline, and it is believed that he became weak and possibly ill. We don't know all the details about his health, but it's clear that the years of his reign took a toll on him. Solomon's mind may have also become troubled as he reflected on the choices he had made. His spiritual decline and the consequences of his actions weighed heavily on him. It's hard to say if Solomon truly repented for turning away from God. The Bible does not tell us if Solomon fully confessed his sins or sought forgiveness before he died. What we do know is that he had moments of reflection. In the book of Ecclesiastes, which many believe was written by Solomon near the end of his life, he expresses feelings of regret and emptiness. He talks about how all his wealth, wisdom, and achievements seemed meaningless without a close relationship with God. In Ecclesiastes, Solomon asks deep questions about the purpose of life, showing that he was struggling with his decisions. Despite his wisdom, Solomon's actions led to a divided kingdom, and his final days seemed to be marked by a sense of loss. While we can't be sure if he repented, it's clear that he recognized the consequences of his actions. His story serves as a warning about how choices in life can affect not only our own lives, but also the future of others. As Solomon's life drew to a close, he knew that his death was near. He understood that his son, Rehoboam, would be the next king of Israel. Solomon had spent much of his life building a powerful and prosperous kingdom, but he also knew that his decisions in his later years had caused serious problems. He had allowed idolatry to spread, which weakened the nation spiritually. Now, as he prepared to pass on the throne, there was tension within the kingdom. Solomon wanted to make sure that his son, Rehoboam, would be ready to rule. Rehoboam was Solomon's son, but it was clear that the kingdom's future was uncertain. The people of Israel were becoming unhappy with the heavy taxes and forced labor that Solomon had imposed. As king, Solomon had made many demands to fund his large building projects, including the temple. These burdens caused unrest among the people, and they hoped that Rehoboam would be more lenient. When Solomon died, Rehoboam became king, but his rule was immediately challenged. The people of Israel came to him with a request. They asked Rehoboam to lighten their burdens and reduce the heavy taxes and forced labor. However, Rehoboam, influenced by his young advisors, rejected their request and chose to increase the burdens instead. This decision led to division. 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel rebelled against Rehoboam and chose Jeroboam as their king. Only the tribes of Judah and Benjamin stayed loyal to Rehoboam. This division marked the beginning of the split between the northern and southern kingdoms of Israel, and it showed how Solomon's choices had lasting effects on the future of the nation. Solomon's legacy and impact on Israel are still felt today, even though his reign ended in division and struggle. Despite his mistakes in his later years, Solomon made lasting contributions to Israel that continue to be remembered. One of Solomon's greatest achievements was the building of the temple in Jerusalem. This temple became the center of worship for the Israelites and was considered one of the most beautiful and sacred places in the world. It represented God's presence among his people and was a symbol of Solomon's wisdom and devotion during his early reign. Even though the temple was later destroyed, it is still an important part of Israel's history and faith. Another contribution of Solomon is the Book of Proverbs, which contains wise sayings and teachings. Many of these proverbs offer advice on how to live a good moral life and follow God's path. Proverbs is still widely read and valued for its wisdom today. It's a reflection of the deep understanding that Solomon had about life, relationships, and faith. Solomon is also credited with writing the Song of Solomon, also known as the Song of Songs, which is a beautiful poetic book about love and the relationship between a man and a woman. It is often seen as a symbol of the love between God and his people. While Solomon's life ended in disappointment, his wisdom and writings remain a powerful legacy. His story teaches us that wisdom is a gift, but it must be used wisely. Solomon's mistakes remind us that faithfulness to God is key, and that the choices we make have long-lasting consequences. In conclusion, King Solomon's reign was a time of great success and wealth for Israel, marked by wisdom, peace, and the building of the magnificent temple. However, his later years were filled with spiritual decline, poor choices, and the consequences of turning away from God. Despite his wisdom, Solomon's life teaches us an important lesson. Even the wisest among us can make mistakes, and the choices we make can affect not only our own lives, but the future of others. Solomon's story is a reminder of the importance of staying faithful to God, even in times of success. His early wisdom and devotion brought blessings to Israel, but his later disobedience caused division and hardship. The lessons we can learn from Solomon's life include the need for consistent faithfulness, the value of wisdom, and the responsibility of leadership. Solomon's reign shows us that leadership is not just about making wise decisions, but also about staying true to our values and guiding others in faith. As we reflect on Solomon's life, let us consider the wisdom we seek in our own lives, the faithfulness we show, and the way we lead those around us. Solomon's story calls us to think carefully about our choices, to remain humble, and to remember that true wisdom comes from staying close to God. Thank you for watching. Take a moment to reflect on the lessons Solomon's life offers, and consider how you can apply wisdom, faithfulness, and leadership in your own life. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more insights into biblical history.